Welcome to Batchademia,
a podcast so educational it could be a university class.
With your hosts,
Danielle Dick McHugh,
Kim Hannah,
and Bill Henniger. Welcome, everybody, to the dumpster fire edition of Batchademia, our last episode of the season. And today it's me, Bill, and Danielle. How you doing, Danielle?
Doing pretty good.
I've heard you have some rage built up. You're ready to take it out.
Oh yeah, I have some words. For the Bachelor franchise.
I love it. So first thing, question of the day. Would you rather go to the DMV or have to be in a throuple with Clayton?
I would absolutely rather go to the DMV.
And I hear you have a funny DMV story for us.
I do. So recently I turned 40 and I decided I should look at my license to see when it expired, and it did indeed expire on my birthday. So I thought that I should probably go renew it. And I needed to do the real ID thing. So rather than just, because you can renew it online, but I was like, yeah, I'll just go in and take care of this while we're at it. So I drive to the DMV and it is not in the place that it was the last time. So luckily it was close. So I just had to pop across the street. And
where is it now? Where is it?
So it used to, for listeners that do not know the Waterloo layout, the DMV used to be in the Waterloo Mall,
right?
And it is now in a little strip mall thing across the street, kind of where the old Kmart was.
Okay.
By Tokyo.
Yes.
Where that place is. Yeah.
Yep.
So I get there, it looks pretty nice. Side note, it's very encouraging. Like the little centers where people take their tests, they have you got this, hang in there, posters above everything, which I really appreciate. But so I park and I go in, and as I'm kind of going in, this woman's pulling up right next to the building and parking her car there. And it really is sort of blocking the way. But so I go in, I check myself in. So you make appointments now, and I'm taking way too long to tell.
No, I love it.
But so I go in, I check myself in, and you have to use your phone. It's probably not the easiest thing for people that aren't comfortable with technology. So I sit down, and the woman who has parked her car comes in with an elderly woman. My guess is probably her mother, who is using a walker, and she's helping her sign in. And one of the guys that works there is like, ma'am, are you, are you parked out there? And she's like, yeah, that's me, but I need to get my mom checked in and then I'll move it. And he's like, no, you're blocking traffic. You need to go out and move it. And she's like, I'm trying to check my mom in. And so then she because the DMV is the one place in the world where we've all just decided that we're going to treat people like absolute crap. And it's okay, that's just the culture of the place. Yep. She just starts cursing at this guy, and this guy's totally not being helpful. Right. And then so other people decide to join in. So a woman in front of me is like, mister, why ain't you helping her? And, this is messed up. And everybody's cursing though. I'm just sparing you all. And I'm just oh, I love the DMV. And then so then a guy next to me, so there's all this chaos and is ensuing. And a guy next to me is like, so how are you enjoying this weather? It's a stranger. But then so another person comes in, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna help them sign in because I don't want this mean guy to come. So I help this person sign in, and then somebody behind them sees me and it's like, can you help me too? So the next thing I know, I'm just standing there helping everybody sign in to the DMV.
You've become a DMV employee.
I do. I have a part-time job there now. I report tomorrow at 10 a.m. now. But it was a DMV experience that I hoped for.
That's amazing.
So I found it quite awful, and simultaneously there's just some things in the world that never change, and it's a little nice to know that you can always go to the DMV and expect to hear a good throwdown.
I didn't really care much about this question. I just wanted to give you a segue into your story about the DMV, which you told me to remind you of. Hear me out. I think you go for the throuple with Clayton because Rachel and Gabby are like BFFs now. And it's like, how many friends did you get out of your DMV experience?
Probably more friends than you guess. I do have a wild talent at making friends with strangers in public spaces. So, I did not have an orgasm at the DMV, and maybe a throuple with Clayton maybe does or does not lead to that.
I'm gonna bet with Clayton it doesn't.
Oh,
He's like, wow. I didn't think we would get an orgasm reference in the first 5 minutes of the show. So things are going well.
Yeah, this is going to be an episode you want to keep listening to.
Yeah, but maybe not with your kids. All right, we ready for the recap? I'm going to do my best. You hop in here and add anything that I miss. I'm going to do my best to make this 2 minutes because a lot happened and simultaneously a lot didn't happen. So we end from last episode where Susie, right? I can't believe I'm already blanking on her name. Susie goes home after Clayton kind of like flips out because she doesn't want to be with him. So we come into the rose ceremony and it's Gabby and Rachel. And Clayton basically says, I wanted Susie to stay. She wouldn't say because, I had sex with both of you. And by the way, I had sex with both of you. Not sure he really needed to put this out into the world. And so both Gabby and Rachel kind of lose it. They walk off. Gabby looks like she's just done, where Rachel just kind of like gets left by herself. So he goes to try to retrieve Gabby and is like, stay, I want to fight for you. And basically talks Gabby into staying. And Gabby's like, no, this isn't fair. But he talks her into it, right? Pan back to Rachel, and she's like sitting on the floor with her rose, just kind of like looking around, kind of lost. But he talks her into staying. So he's like, hey, you could be the person I love. Just because I love Susie the most doesn't mean I could love you. Come meet my parents. All right. So they stay. They take his rose. Very awkward. Go ahead.
I want to acknowledge that meanwhile, we are hearing the echoes of their sobs.
Yes.
The entire time. I think that was a really important element of the experience.
Yes, at one point he's just standing like the giant statue he is, and you can just hear two women like wailing. So he gives them the rose. They both accept the rose. It's very awkward. They like drink champagne. The women are like chugging champagne and like handing it back like another. So then they come to meet his family. Basically his dad tells him he's a dumbass. And the women seem okay. They've made their peace. They are going to meet his family. They're going to kind of go through with this process. Seems like the whole family thing goes well. His parents are delightful. His dad seems to call him on his BS. His mom asked the women some difficult questions, but I felt like they were kind of like, you know what? Maybe you just shouldn't be with Clayton was what she was getting at. And so he gets done.
Did you feel like the family liked one of the women more than the other and thought that they knew who he was going to choose?
I felt like they liked Gabby more.
Absolutely. Yeah. I felt that they were like, oh, well, like, Nicole's nice, but like clearly like you do like love one of them the most, and that is Gabby. And
right. They
never said it, but like you really felt that from them in a way that I hadn't. You don't always get from the families.
And I feel like Gabby's definitely the more mature of the two. Rachel seems very nice, but Gabby seems more to understand who she is and kind of have this, here's who I am and you need to take it or leave it kind of thing. So that episode ends with him basically being like, I don't love either of these women. I need Susie. So we come back to last night, and Jesse Palmer is like, Susie's still here. He tells the family, Susie's still here. I'll go talk to Susie. Why isn't Clayton going and talking to Susie? He's sending his emissary, Jesse Palmer, who basically goes in and tells Susie, you really need to go talk to him. So it wasn't even like, hey, if this is okay, think through it. He was like, you really should go talk to him. So, okay. She goes and talks to him. He says, I didn't mean anything I said, which I think is a bunch of BS, that he told her all the mean things he said. He didn't mean it. He just was feeling it in his heart. And that's what he had to say, which I have a whole problem with, that you get to just basically say whatever you want and then be like, well, I can't be held accountable because it was in my heart. At what point is what you say who you are? And at what point do you just get to say whatever you want and then just kind of be like, well, I can't be held accountable. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, following your heart, is this thing that gets said a lot on the show. I have to follow my heart. And it really felt like it's this saying that just sort of, is, oh, well, if I just say that I needed to do that, then I'm sort of absolved of any harm, any collateral damage that is done in the process of me following my heart. I'm not responsible for, because like my heart is the most important thing.
Right. Which is interesting because Danielle often responds to my texts with follow your heart, Bill.
Absolutely.
So basically he talks to Susie. Susie says, I need to think about it. At this point, Clayton decides, well, I have a chance with Susie. I need to break up with the other two women, Gabby and Rachel. And so what would be the kind thing to do? Well, sit down with each of them. No, we prize efficiency on this show. So he's going to sit down with both of them. And he sits down with both of them and basically is like, hey, this has been great. I know I told you I could love you, but turns out, no, I can't. Gabby gets up and walks off. And then he tries to, I don't know what he was trying to do other than make himself feel better. And then he asks if he can walk her out. And she says no. And then they go to the live ceremony, and basically she tells him, you can say this, you can say that this was happening, but you really knew more than you let on, and you kept me here just to keep me here, just in case. And he kept saying, I understand, and then explaining why that wasn't true. So then it's over. So then we go back to poor Rachel, who has been left in a room yet again for what seems like an hour, just crying. He comes back and he's like, same thing. And she is much less defiant than Gabby and is kind of like, I can't believe you're just leaving me here. I never stopped fighting for you. You didn't fight for me. And he just keeps saying, I understand, but I have to do what my heart tells me I have to do. Then they go to the after the rose ceremony, and she basically tells him he's a dirty, dirty dog, to use one of Kim's favorite terms. And he's like, yeah, I totally understand that. But seriously, I was in love. I had to follow my heart. And everyone is still mad at him. So then we go back to the rose ceremony. He tries one big Hail Mary with Susie, and she says, I gotta go. I don't really want to be with you. And we think it's over, but it's not. Apparently, Susie got back in his DMs, and now they're together and they are in love, and he's moving with her to Virginia, which I thought was, he seemed very proud of himself, that he's like, I quit my job and I'm moving to Virginia. It's, oh, wow. And that is the end of the season. And we are all very unfulfilled, much like I would assume all the women would be in a throuple with Clayton.
So, question about the timeline. So one thing that I was really confused about, and I went back and I watched it again this morning. So Susie comes and meets his parents, and it seems like everyone's a little bit surprised that she's there.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. When she comes to talk to Clayton, they just bring him in the room with his parents.
Well, and so then they go outside and they have this little conversation, and she's like, she kind of tells him, like, I don't know how I feel about things, right? And then the next thing I know, he's like proposing to her.
Right.
And I was like, I seriously thought that I missed something in the timeline. And I don't know if there's if this is just like the editing, but I was like, good God, what made you feel like the next step is a proposal?
See, I don't think you missed anything, because in that he kept saying, as much time as she needs, I'm going to give her time. She needs to come around to this. And then he is like, but I'm going to get a ring and propose. It's like, he seems to say things, but not really understand exactly what he's saying.
Well, in the proposal, he's like, this is like a sign of like my commitment to you. But I was like, good God, like how devoted to this narrative is this like franchise too, that they're just like gonna keep funneling forward in like, I mean, like that's sort of how I felt with a lot of this, was like stuff kept happening and they're like, but there is a form that we follow and we're just gonna keep following the form.
Yeah. It made for good TV in a really bad way.
I feel dirty. Like as a watcher, having watched this, like my husband said that he was like, Danielle, this is how I feel being a football fan. Like I keep watching football, knowing all of the ethical problems with the NFL, like with concussions. And he's like, and I just keep watching. And I was like, this was, I think, one of those times where I'm like, Danielle, there's so much wrong with this show. And that's why it makes a great podcast, right?
Right.
It's great fodder for criticism, for conversation. But I just felt like what made good TV was also the thing that like me as like a witness to like, I think so many people being treated so poorly in service of my entertainment is gross.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't feel it dirty.
I felt a little bit like that, but I also was like, I don't know. Yeah. I am entertained. Are you not entertained?
I mean, I wanted to know what was going to happen, you know, like it piqued my curiosity, but I also am like, oh my gosh, as a human, what does it say about me that like, this is what I'm curious about? So I'm I don't know, but I mean, I can talk a little bit later about, I'm very angry with Clayton, but part of my anger is towards the franchise.
Okay.
So
all right, let's start with concept one then. I wanted to talk a little bit about the meaning of words, and we've talked a lot about that this season, right? And around this idea that specifically there's a lot of research with emotions that you have much better outcomes. People are happier if they have a much broader understanding and vocabulary around labeling emotions. And so when I really noticed this happening was after Gabby goes home and then she sits down with Clayton and she keeps, she's talking to him in this rose ceremony. He's like, I understand that you're mad. And she said several times, I'm not mad. I am hurt and I am disappointed. And he said, I understand all of that. And you have every right to be mad. And so I thought it'd be interesting, especially with you, and your expertise in communication, like how do we reconcile that, or how do we move past, how do we get people to understand that you react to things differently if you are disappointed and hurt than if you're just mad. And in class, when I talk about this, the example I use is that if your significant other is mad at you because you forgot to take out the trash, the way you make up to them or address that is different than if your significant other is mad because you cheated on them, right? But we use mad for both terms.
Well, I mean, one, I would sort of say that I think that emotions are complex and that as humans, we have the capacity to hold more than one emotion at the same time, right? So you can be hurt and you can be mad, right? Like, I don't think that those things aren't, exclusive to one another. I mean, I felt like he was hearing, he wasn't listening. So, I mean, one example of this is the I love you thing. Like, I don't think they weren't mad that he slept with other people, and they try to express like that he slept with other people. They tried to express this later in one of the episodes where they're like, we aren't Susie. What bothered Susie didn't bother us. And I think that that was their way of trying to communicate that they were upset that he had expressed that they loved them, and that carried weight for them. And that they there was sort of this assumption that he wasn't saying I love you to everyone.
Right.
And so it seemed like that was the issue, but then he kept saying I love you to them.
Right.
And so like that was like this thing where you're like, you're missing the point. If your response to them saying quit saying I love you if it doesn't mean anything is to say, well, I love you, you're kind of missing something here. And I mean, I thought that Gabby was very good at articulating her emotions. So
yeah,
and kind of calling him on some of the, because like I felt like he's just was super unaware that he was feeling things, but he wasn't doing any sort of self-reflection to understand why he was feeling those things before he communicated them. Or so when Gabby called him out, it's after he breaks up with them together, and it's sort of like, I tried to leave and you begged me to stay, and like you needed me to leave on your terms, right? And that's what I'm upset about. Like I'm upset that you would treat me that way. And that's where the betrayal is, right, too. I thought that she was very good at articulating that. And I don't know that I really think that you can express your way into other people understanding how you feel if they aren't willing to do the work on the other side.
Well, that's probably a good point, right? You can use all the correct words, but if he's only willing to just say that, and I probably going back to that too, is like he kept saying I love you, but then he would say, well, there's different types of love and there's different kinds of love. And so again, he's really being inarticulate, and maybe like he should have used better terms for, I love you the most. And that also really seemed to gall Gabby, was that he was essentially ranking the women. So it wasn't like, I want to be with you, I want to be with my best option. And then if that goes away, then I'll go to my next option. And I mean, that's very dehumanizing, right? I mean, that's the way you buy a car or you pick a house, is like, well, this is our dream house, but this one checks all the boxes too.
Right. I mean, I don't, there is so many ways in which he sort of discounted. Like, I really felt like he was like, this is my journey to find love. And, I kind of used this before. And if you are collateral damage on that journey, like people are going to get hurt. This is just you getting hurt. What can I do about it? And, we've talked a lot about apologies and what makes good apologies. And I think that what was so frustrating with him is he would apologize, but it was very generic. Mm-hmm. He could say like, I'm sorry that I made you mad, but like, he couldn't sort of say, I made you mad because that like sport sort of like, or even at the after the rose sort of stuff where he's like, I've learned so much. What did you learn?
Right.
Dude, like, what did you do? Could you please articulate what it is that you learned? Oh, like this has been really hard for you. Well, what have you done to become a better person? I want details, dude. Like, to just say that and then to keep acting the way that he did over and over again, that dismissed everybody else's like experience through that, it really like showed that he didn't understand.
Well, and you heard that a lot because he would say, yeah, I'm sorry. That really hurt, but I was following my heart. And so it was not really, and he said I'm sorry you feel that way several times, or he's like, I take accountability for that, but I was following my heart. And it's like, well, then you don't take accountability for it. You're essentially saying that I am powerless against my emotions and you just have to deal with it, which is fine, but don't apologize then. Just be like, hey, if you're on the Clayton train, you got to deal with whatever my emotions do at that time, and I can't be held accountable.
Yeah, there's sort of like a separation from him and his heart, right? Like there's me and there's my heart, and I have no agency over what my heart is taking.
Yep.
The ride that my heart is taking me on. And
I really am a good guy. I'm really a nice guy. I'm really a nice guy. I'm a good guy, but it's my heart that, like, you know, I just can't be held accountable for what my heart does.
So I have a question for you, Bill, about you know, Gabby.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I was so sort of intrigued by this. You can't measure love.
Mm-hmm.
And by measuring love, like you're turning this into a competition. And as a quantitative researcher that probably measures love, I wanted to, because like I'm sympathetic to what she's saying in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered if you, because I'm trying to process, like I'm also sympathetic to Clayton saying that he has different sorts of love, right? And so I was just, and as like, and we've kind of talked about this a little bit before, that we're also in this like monogamous culture, right? That ways that we've been taught about to think about love all support sort of monogamous relationships. If you try to have probably a throuple, right? Or a polyamorous relationships, like they're hard to navigate in a culture that is built on monogamy. So like I just kind of was wondering, you know, I was like thinking about how all of those things kind of play into stuff.
Well, I think probably any of those, even in a non-monogamous culture, there's probably a reason that monogamy is the, you know, across the globe is the most likely kind of setup of relationships, because it's probably the easiest to navigate, right? I feel like evolutionarily wise, had it been easier to have like a thruple or polyamorous where you have two couples that basically date each other, or, you know, a polygamy, or, you know, something like that, then that would be the norm, and then monogamy would be the norm. So we should probably recognize that the more people you add into a relationship, the harder it makes it. But
more people, more problems.
More people, more problems. I like it. As far as like measuring love, I mean, I talked about before, like I really don't like the term falling in love, because it suggests that there's a destination. And really, anyone who's been married for a long time will tell you it's not like you fall in love and then you are stagnant at this level of love. Like there are days where you see your partner and you're like, wow, they are amazing. And then there's days where you see your partner and it's like, if you chew like that one more time, I'm gonna stab you. Or say, you know, right, I'm gonna lock you out of the house. And so that's probably one of the issues. And then there are different types of love, right? I think probably where the issue comes in, and maybe this is where Gabby, and you know, it's hard to be articulate in any of those situations, and she did an amazing job, but Clayton needs to explain what he wants. And I feel like maybe that's where she was mad. Not that he's like measuring love, is that he's saying, I love all of you. And it's like, okay, but what one of those loves is the one you want? Because he kept saying, oh, it's different types of love. All right, then which one is the one you choose? Because then Gabby knows. And I think it goes back to what she said. And I thought she was really articulate in this when she said it was about you getting to send me home. You did not like me making the decision. And I feel like that's really where, you know, Clayton did his most dirty moves, was that he didn't give them all the information. And then when they tried to take their ability to say, I'm done, he started leveraging all of these, like, well, I do love you. I love you. You know, we could be together. I'll let you meet my parents. And then it's like, well, I don't love you that much. So see you later.
Well, I mean, I there was even these moments where like he was like begging, you know, Gabby to stay after that rose ceremony. And I was like, dude, like, why? Like, why are you fighting this at this point? And I can't imagine what it was like for Gabby and Rachel to watch this back and realize that he had told Susie that he loves her the most, because like
Right.
it was, I mean, where it was sort
And
of
clearly she was his first choice, because that's, I mean, you know, keep going. Sorry.
well, it was to me, it was sort of apparent, even when he like handled these rose ceremonies and stuff, that he kept bringing Susie up. I was like, oh, normally like that they wouldn't keep bringing
Right.
folks up. And so there are like little clues that I think that they were given to think
Right.
that maybe that was what was going on. But I do think, I can't imagine how sort of betrayed you feel watching this back and realizing that he had said that.
But it's not incumbent on them to pick up on those secrets. And also when they tried to leave, he stopped him. So this actually goes to our next concept. So you set us up very well. Good job. When we talk about like keeping somebody on the back burner or on the hook, and I actually did a impromptu poll on Twitter. What is the term that you use or that the youths use when you want to keep someone on the line because you're kind of interested in them? And if this person doesn't like you, then you'll go back to them. And some of the terms people said on the side. I used backburner or on the hook. I found some research that used backburner. On the bench, Elaine said it was simply just called being an ass. So what we're talking about though is this kind of idea where you might want to date someone, but you think maybe they are not that interested in you. And so you keep this other person here. And it kind of seems like that's what Clayton was doing. Right. And so I guess the question is like, when is that ethical? When is it not? I feel like there's a point early on in dating where you're not really committed to each other. And it's okay to kind of, you know, think about two people. And that's the whole point of the show, right? You get to date multiple people out in the open. But there definitely is a point where you hit a tipping point and it seems like you're expected to kind of make your decisions.
So in some ways, like, so my response is, I think that only in a few situations where it's sort of a kind of an agreed upon situation, right? Mm-hmm. Is it ethical? That being said, I also think that it is not a unreasonable human emotion to want to protect oneself.
Right.
Right. You know, to like go, oh, like, I don't know how this person feels about me, or I do like this person, but there's like this other thing out there where like, I don't think that it's a completely like, I don't know that I think it would make you a bad person for feeling like you'd want to do that. But actually doing that, especially in the situation that was high stakes for Clayton and Rachel and Gabby, where what you're moving towards is an engagement, and there are family and other people that are involved in this at this point. I feel like that's a very different ethical situation than like, oh, well, we've gone on a few dates and I like that person, but like, you know, I swiped right on a few other people. Right. You know, I'm trying to sound cool, like I know what online dating is.
No, you got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. So, I mean, I understand why people would feel vulnerable and would want to protect themselves in that way. Like I can empathize with that emotion. But I also think that it's a selfish one.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a point where you have to think about other people's emotions too, right? Like you bear some responsibility in the greater world to think about, if I keep this person on the hook, what does it mean to them in 3 weeks when then I say, oh, well, I'm not that interested. If I kind of know that it's going to be, and I think there's some responsibility. Maybe that's where Clayton really bothered me. I mean, I know he bothered all of America for various reasons, but I think that's where, when I was watching, I was like, this is where he really actively was an ass, was that he knew that Susie was the one he wanted. And he actively kept some of the women around just in case Susie said no. And you could see he made the decision to cut him loose once Susie was like, well, I need to think about this. And I think at that point he was like, all right, well, she didn't say flat out no, so I have a chance. Now's probably the time. But he introduced the women to his family, which when you introduce someone to your family, that's kind of a, that's a commitment. That's a step forward. So yeah.
Well, and I mean, he kept saying like, oh, well, at the time, that is how I felt. And I wanted to be like, okay, dude, I believe you. I like believe that he genuinely didn't necessarily know, right?
Right.
But I'm also like, you're responsible when you are in this situation as the lead, kind of as like Nick Vale said, like when you are the lead, you are in a position of power here. And you have some responsibility to like think about how you feel.
Right.
Right. And I mean, I think that your insight too, that he had like a responsibility to be clear about what his expectations were. And like, I think is a good one, right? That like in some ways, when we're talking about the back burner on the hook, that some of it is like, it is ethical if both parties involved understand the circumstances of the relationship. What's not okay is when you have, of different circumstances and you aren't being transparent about it.
Well, and I just going back multiple episodes, he kicked that one girl off because she had a friend with benefits, right? And then he was like, that is not okay. I mean, we're really getting into some dicey waters now with him, right? But it's okay for him. And so.
Well, I mean, I do think too, like they felt like, oh, did you just tell me that you loved me so that you could sleep with me? And like, basically you shacked up with both of us, even though you didn't, you kind of knew.
Right.
And here's what's hard is I don't know that I think he knew if he would have taken any time to think through things, but I don't know. I think he's kind of dense and didn't know. But it doesn't make him less responsible.
Well, he kept saying, I had no malicious intent. And that bothered me because it's like, well, no shit, you had no malicious. Like, I don't think anyone gets on The Bachelor and is like, I'm going to make some girls cry. I'm going to screw around on them. It's like, of course you didn't have malicious intent. And I felt like that was a way for him to be like, so I don't have a lot of responsibility because I wasn't purposely hurting you. It's like, right. But you still own some responsibility. And that's the big difference, right? Is to say, well, I wasn't purposely hurting you doesn't mean that you didn't hurt them and you aren't responsible for it. And it's kind of like what you said, you can have multiple emotions or, you can be responsible for one thing and not the other. It's not like they're mutually exclusive. Right.
Right. And I mean, yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about breakups.
Okay. Man, I lost my train of thought. What do you want to say about breakups?
Okay, so I'm like really interested from a communication standpoint on like his decision to do both the rose ceremony and to break up with them together. And they call him out on this. And I think that it is like a really important moment because one, I think they're like, hey, we weren't the same people.
Right.
These were two separate relationships. And then for you to, in both of these moments, but I also think this is a way that he was communicating power. So in both of those things, Gabby described it as this couldn't be a discussion because of how you did it. And I think that's what she's getting at is in both of those situations, he's in a position of power where it's a speech, right? It's a rose ceremony. He has the microphone. He gives a speech. They really aren't like, this isn't like, let's sit around and talk about what happened and then navigate and negotiate what's best for our relationship in this moment, given what's happened. It's him standing there telling them.
Yeah.
And then, and that's what he kind of did with the breakup, where if he might as well have done it one-on-one because he ended up having those conversations with them one-on-one.
Yeah.
But like in doing that, he turned it into, I'm giving a speech to you all, telling you what's going to happen, as opposed to being this like a dialogue between them. I think it was a power play.
Yeah, I think it also demonstrated how he was thinking about them, right? Because she said, you know, I am not a like best girl, second best girl, third best girl, but the way he did it was essentially, I'm going to break up with both of you because now I've made my decision, and why treat each of you like an individual? Like, this is just the most efficient way to do it. You both get the same information. It's
I think when you mentioned that it was dehumanizing, I think that this really played into that, because it really did just treat them like, oh, you're both just contestants on this show. I was weighing my options.
Yep.
Right. I think, what I would be, and part of the reason I'm a little ragey about the franchise is I really am sort of curious as to how much of this, like, when was some of this his decision and when was some of this like directed by producers?
So I saw several of the former Bachelor contestants that said like this was totally his decision. They would not make you break up with two women or two people at one time. They said that is a decision you get to make. They totally let you lead it. And so, yeah, I don't think he thinks a lot about other people's feelings.
It's kind of spectacular in its awfulness.
So I had a question. When you get broken up with, what is your responsibility to the person who broke up with you? Because I feel like he really, like, part of what I was noticing, and he's like following these women around after he breaks up with them. And it's like, he clearly wants them to say, it's okay, I forgive you. And it's like, he didn't really seem like he wanted to comfort them. It was like, I'm not a bad person. Please, you tell me that I'm not a bad person. Yeah.
I think that was one of the other things that made me pretty ragey. In the workplace, I complain all the time because I often am given advice that I like need to learn to say no to things, right? And I get pissed because I'm like, I do say no. And then people ask me 3 more times to do the same thing. That no doesn't get heard. So in order for me to say no, I have to say it 3 times, where like, I feel like I have counterparts, other people that I work with, that can say no once and people move on.
Right.
And I was so angry watching this because it is, I mean, even his dad was like, dude, she left.
Right.
Like, she gave you an answer. You need to listen and respect that. I mean, I think actually Clayton's parents might be his one hope, because I think that his parents he was raised by some people that at least know how to call him on his own crap.
Right.
But I was just flummoxed by the way in which they would sort of be like, no, like, and even with like Susie.
Yeah, he did it twice with Susie.
And he was like, I need you to say it's over. And
it's like, it's over.
Like, it's over. And I just felt like he couldn't recognize a no unless it was like very, very explicitly communicated. And even then, I don't know that I believe that he really honored that.
No, yeah. I think it's interesting that they're like, oh, he, and then she got in contact with him. I feel like, I wonder if he got back in contact with her. But I mean, you could see like, he tried to push her that first time and she said no. And that's when he got pissed off. And then the second time, it took her like 4 times. And he's like, all right, fine. Yeah, he just doesn't. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, and I think he's confused that with a sign of care.
Yep.
Right. That like,
yeah,
my way of communicating care to you is by being persistent, even when that's not what you have articulated that you're wanted or interested in. And I think like that's not healthy at all. But yeah, in terms of like responsibility, that's a good question. I would say like one, I don't know if in the moment you're that, I mean, I think your responsibility is to listen to the fact that they're breaking up with you and like
Right.
honoring that. I don't know. You don't have to make them feel good, and you certainly don't have to make them feel good in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was interesting because Rachel was kind of persistent in trying to get him to reconsider, as she was walking out. And it's like he was very stoic and just like, yeah, I mean, he was trying to say, I'm sorry, but he wasn't being comforting really, other than just like, I apologize, but get in the car. I apologize. Like, I give you a hug, but get in the car. It's not like he was great in that moment. But then he like flipped his shit on Susie. So I don't know. Yeah.
I think that, I feel like Rachel was way more hurt.
Yeah.
Right. Where I felt like Gabby was more angry, and I think she was hurt too, but I think how they expressed
Right.
their hurt and their anger was a little bit different.
Well, and
And
people deal with being hurt different, and there's not like a model that's the perfect way of doing it, y'all. And so I think Rachel probably was dealing with it with the way she deals with being hurt, and Gabby was dealing with it. So
well, I felt that Gabby felt very, very betrayed, and I think that Rachel did too. But I think that in some ways, Gabby felt like, oh, this isn't this person that I
Right.
cared about. Where I think Rachel was having such a hard time letting go of who she thought that he was.
Yeah.
That like, and where they were going. I don't know. It was, the whole thing was infuriating and heart-wrenching.
Yeah, you want to go on to your wild card? I feel like this is a good transition.
Sure. So I wanted to call this empathy scapegoating and Danielle's rage towards the franchise. So I thought that it was really interesting. Blake Horstrom, or whatever his last name is, Blake H, who was a finalist on Becca's season and then a villain on Bachelor in Paradise for after he slept with several women on Stagecoach. I've always actually been, despite his mistakes, a big fan of Blake. And Blake tweeted that he felt that this was an example as to why the franchise should cast somebody who has been in the final three as a bachelor. That Clayton, having never really been in love with Michelle, not really going through the experience of having your heart broken on national television, was unable to empathize with their experience because he had never sort of like gone through that. And I think that that's a really interesting point. Like, one, like, Bill, I'd just be interested in like, what do you think about that position?
I mean, there's been people who weren't in the final three who were very empathetic and were very thoughtful in the way they broke up with people. So I don't think being in the final three, automatically makes you empathetic. But I think it's a good, I think it's a good take on it. Like clearly Clayton needed somebody to be like, take a breath, think about what you're doing and how it's going to make people feel. And clearly he's never been, it didn't seem like at any point in his life anyone's ever said, think about your actions and how they are going to impact other people. Which is a very, white middle-aged guy to just plow through and be like, this is what I want, this is how I'm going to do things, and be damned.
Well, and I mean, a few things there. Like, one, I agree that I do think that having when the lead has had that experience of having your heart broken in that way, it probably does shift the way that they navigate things. Like you said, though, empathy does not require you having gone through the same thing in order to have. In fact, like definitionally, that's what makes it empathy. So I think that is a really important one. So in my field, we tend to sort of revere empathy in some ways that I think have been criticized as well, because we see performance, like acting, as a way to learn how to empathize. That there's something about trying, like literally trying on someone's gestures, their voice, things like that, teaches one to internally empathize as well. And that skill of empathy outside of the acting room, right, is something that you gain, right? So I do believe, though, that empathy is like a learnable skill. I think it is a skill. And so if Clayton wants to be more empathetic after this experience, there are things that he can do to stretch his empathy muscles, if you will. But I think the other thing that you're kind of saying is, I felt that this season, particularly these last few episodes, have been more about race than some of the other ones. So like Michelle or Matt James, where we're explicitly recognizing interracial dating, we're talking about someone being the first Black bachelorette. There are ways that him performing whiteness, right?
Right.
And performing privilege that is oftentimes attached to that whiteness was so incredible, because he is a unique villain in that he's a nice guy, right?
Yeah. And they played that up, right? He's just smiling and he doesn't take himself too serious. And, you know,
you can be a nice person and exercise power and privilege in some real shit ways, right? And I think that, so like, it is kind of a fascinating, and I want to process this even more, but I really do think part of what I'm so angry about is we have this franchise that has been so terrible in terms of the ways that it's handled race. And then it feels like they cast this like white guy that none of us understand why he's being cast, right? Still don't. And he performs privilege in the most frustrating, like unethical use of power that is sort of like disguised by his like kindness, right? Like, you know, like it's such a interesting example of that. And I guess like what I'm sort of frustrated about is that I feel like the franchise, I do think that he has lots of agency. This is not to not hold him accountable. He is so accountable. But I also am really worried that it's going to be like, oh, well, Clayton's just a dick, right? That he's just not a nice guy. And I'm like, there are things that this whole show, and like, they're just decisions to cast him. They're decisions to like perpetuate particular narratives, to continue narratives. Like, the franchise has a responsibility in this. And I mean, they give nods to it, but I feel like they've placed so much of the burden of this discussion being brought up by other people, right? Being brought up by people that are doing these podcasts, or being brought up by Nick Vale being on there and uttering the word power. That like, it doesn't feel like, it just feels like they're scapegoating Clayton in certain ways. That like, I'm worried that Clayton is going to become the source of all of our rage, and that we're going to like ignore the responsibility that the franchise has in the way that like they allowed his sort of like white privilege to be performed in the way that it was. That they created the space for this to happen through the structures of the show and all of this other, and their casting decisions and a bajillion other decisions that they made as a franchise. So I'm I'm kind of like trying to process a lot of this because it feels significant that this is what we get as audience members after a lot of this stuff. So
I agree. I don't have anything to add. I thought that was very well stated.
So I can segue this a little bit for us. So I want to be excited about Gabby and Rachel being named the next Bachelorette, but I'm not. I'm really worried about them.
Yeah.
Because at this point, I go like, is that even like an honor? Right? Like, I don't feel like they take care of the people on the show at all. They don't take care of the contestants. I don't have a lot of like faith that the show takes care of the leads. And I'm like, where is their ethical responsibility to kind of, yes, these people are signing up for this. Yes, these, you know, like folks are making money off of this and gonna make money after they're on this. But like, does that like mean that the franchise does not have any sort of like relational obligation or ethical obligation to these folks to reciprocate it? And so like, yeah, I'm excited for them, but I'm also worried for them. I don't, you know, like, I don't know what it's going to be like to have two bachelorettes. I'm worried that they're going to just be, they've already been used and exploited. And I feel like this maybe is going to just exploit them more. So I don't know. I want to be excited, especially about Gabby, because I really like Gabby. But I don't know how I feel about it.
Yeah. I watched Joe Millionaire, and they had two guys on there, and those two guys were the most supportive bros that I've ever seen. And I was talking to Elaine about this last night. And so, you know, the thing with having two people gunning for 30 people and they're the same interest, partner interest, is people are like, what if they get in a fight? I think it self-corrects. I think when you like the person, it's like you immediately start setting up boundaries. And it's like Gabby and Rachel obviously like each other. I feel like they seem like they're rational people. This happens with friends all the time, right? I mean, I can think of at least 5 or 6 times in college where when I was single and my friends were single and there was a girl that we were both interested in, you know, we kind of navigated it. So it's clunky, but you know, we're still best friends. And so I think in that way, it's like that self-corrects. I think the problem is like the voyeurism of it. Like you're saying, like, I don't trust the Bachelorette to not pit those two against each other for our entertainment. And, you know.
Well, and this is, I think, some of my struggle with last night, that it was like, oh, look at girl power. These women were so supportive of each other. Like, look at the franchise showing this like wonderful relationship while they allowed this misogynistic guy to do. I mean, I don't know. I think like that's some of my concerns with this scapegoating, is that it's like, oh, well, look at, like, we're showing these women that, I mean, and it was amazing, but I'm like, that was also their choice. Like, that's
well,
like,
because they had to be.
Yes.
Yeah.
They did the labor and the work of that.
Right.
It's not they did that in spite of the show. It wasn't the show that like led them to do that, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that I think that again, from an entertainment standpoint, I think it's going to be a fascinating watch. For me as like a human trying to navigate the ethics of watching this, I'm kind of struggling a little bit.
I am not. I just feel like they are consenting adults, and in that way, that's, you know, I feel like people should have the right to do the things they want. And if they are on that show, I feel like probably where I got the most kind of, and this goes to the lessons learned kind of part of our podcast for the season, when I got really uncomfortable is when, like you said, it was very clear that there's a narrative that's being driven, and Clayton is obviously doing things that are going to hurt the women, and the show stands back and just kind of is like, well, what happens. And then in the end, they try to be like, well, it all worked out in the end. Instead of just saying, yeah, this was horrible. Clayton did him dirty. Him and Susie are together.
Oh, I hated the question. And I know that we're probably running out of time, but when they ask, oh, so, hey, Clayton, was it worth it? Right? Like, was all of this worth it? And I was like, you're asking the wrong person.
Right.
Like, this is like that again, that like somehow it's like, oh, he went through all of these growing pains.
Right.
Like, okay, because he found Susie at the end. And I'm just like, at whose expense?
Well, and that shows just how little he's learned, right? Because he was like, I understand, and I wish I would have blah, 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 and this and that. And then they're like, was it worth it? And then it's like, nice guy, Clayton, big smile, like, well, I've got this woman that I love. And so all this, that I had to go through. And basically, so the end message was F other people's feelings, like do what you got to do, and sucks to be you. And like, at least Clayton got what he wanted.
Well, I mean, I think like that was where I was like, y'all didn't need to use that question. Right? Like, that's where I'm like, we're kind of joking because I had to go back and watch the show because last night we spilled some gas in the garage and we had to clean it all up. And my husband's smoking stuff today. And, it'd be like me going, when we have our ribs later today, like, oh, well, like, was it worth it? Like spilling gasoline all over the house? Like, well, yes, they're good ribs, but like, I could have just had the ribs without the gasoline spill.
Right.
Like, he could have had Susie without all that mess, right? Like, it's not like this was a necessary component.
Or they could have asked the question where he had to hold himself to account, right? Like, do you feel that the way you hurt Rachel and Gabby, does that weigh on you now that you're in this relationship? Like, that's a fair question. And he has to say yes or no, but was it worth it? He gets to not even name them. He gets to just be like, yep, got my woman, big Clayton smile with my white teeth and the all shucks. Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to ask Susie too, like, how do you sort of like navigate this, right? Like, how do you stand backstage, watch all of this? Like, I can't imagine, like, they have to have had some really hard and uncomfortable conversations. Like, I can't imagine that they haven't.
Do you think they stay together?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I have a hard time. I mean, the only reason that I would question that they would is I would have never guessed that she would have recanted to begin with. So, I mean, I do sort of think one thing is you did see people work through relational challenges in a way through these last couple episodes that sometimes I feel like we don't get to see.
Yeah.
So I do think that we got that. So
any positive note? I feel like we're really leaving, and we don't know when we'll talk to you all again. I plan to be back for next season. Are you going to be back?
Probably. I might be ragey about it.
That's fine.
I'm going to be here.
This is going to be a real role reversal where you are like ragey and I'm the one that's like, they're in love.
Well, so I like love. I sort of feel I'm struggling with sort of the ethics of promoting the franchise in any way, right? Like, so I'll probably keep doing this because it's also joyful. And I do think that it's important that people have conversations about what, like, I do think that there are ways that you can ethically or critically watch things.
Mm-hmm.
And that there are more passive and problematic ways of viewing and viewership, if you will. I I just get frustrated when I think that shows lay all that responsibility on the viewers and don't. There are ways in which you can make shows that invite and prompt those conversations a little bit differently than they're doing. So
All right.
but yeah, I mean, I don't know. Are we gonna get Bachelor in Paradise, do you think?
I think so.
It's gonna be
There's going to be some good.
wild.
Yeah. Yep. But I think we're going to get Bachelorette first and then Bachelor in Paradise.
I will say, I think I want to think about it, but I think there are ways that I think Bachelor in Paradise is a more ethical show.
Oh, I think so. Yeah.
So
Yep. Well, maybe we need to. So we will do an in-between episode with the three of us.
that'll be fun.
And maybe we can discuss that. Maybe that'll be a
That'd be
good
fun.
topic. And we can do it like our last one where we also just randomly talk about stuff, which is our most listened to episode ever, Billy Blanks and something. So if you're like, man, I want to hear Danielle and Bill randomly talk about stuff from their lives, it's a good one. It's got like over 5,000 or 500 listens. So
It's exciting stuff.
And so signing off, thank you for listening. Osaka, Japan. We have listeners from Osaka, Japan, and I forgot to look this up. So let me give you a briefer about Osaka, Japan. It is in the Kansai region. It has about 2.7 million people in 2020. Second largest metropolitan area in Japan. Yeah.
Cool. I'd like to go there.
Me too. So, all right.
Awesome.
That's it.
Happy spring break, y'all.
Happy spring break. We will see you sometime. Bye.
You have been listening to Bachademia
With your hosts, Danielle Dick McGee.
Kim Hanna.
And Bill Hennig.
All thoughts and opinions expressed on the show are solely those of the person who spoke them.
If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe to the show, leaving a 5-star rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Also, please share with your family, friends, colleagues, and other ardent Bachelor fans.
If you have comments or questions you would like us to address on the show, you can email us at bachademia@gmail.com.
Or on the Twitter with the handle @Bachademia.
Thanks for listening.